Hello, everyone. I'm Ramona Nadaf. I'm from the Rhetoric Department, and I'm the director of the Art of Writing program at the Townsend Humanities Center. And from the beginning, please excuse my voice. It's just returning. And I know writing is all about voice, so I'm doubly embarrassed of how I sound. But I'm really excited to be here introducing this wonderful Berkeley Writers at Work program. The Berkeley Writers at Work series began in 1997 as a forum for noteworthy campus writers to discuss their writing process and practice. And as you probably know, we have a lot of very wonderful writers on campus that are teaching our students. And Berkeley Writers at Work is different from other types of forums in that it focuses both on how writers write as much as what they write, and they don't separate the form and the content. So today we'll hear a lot about that. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dacher Keltner, Professor Dacher Keltner here, who's the founder and faculty director of the Greater Good Science Center. He received his BA in psychology and sociology from the University of California at Santa Barbara, and thankfully came to us. And he received his PhD from Stanford University, and thankfully he came to Berkeley. His research focuses on the biological and cultural evolution of compassion, awe, love, beauty, and humility, as well as power, social class, and inequality. And I'm sure hearing those big topics and big words, everyone understands how important it is today to be thinking, writing, and talking about humility, for example, inequality. So we're very grateful for Professor Keltner's research and his several books of note, which include Born to be Good, The Science of a Meaningful Life, The Power Paradox, How We Gain and Lose Influence, and most recently, Awe, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. Aristotle believed that philosophy starts with wonder, would be delighted to read this book if he was alive. Professor Keltner has received so many awards in his research, teaching, mentoring, service. He's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Science. He's consulted for many different organizations, including the Sierra Club. And most of you probably have seen the film from Pixar that he was a consultant on, Inside Out 1 and Inside Out 2 and Soul. Finally, he is at the Center of Constitutional Rights in his work to outlaw solitary confinement. I just want to mention that he also hosts a podcast called The Science of Happiness, which you might be interested in listening to after today to learn more about his research. Professor Keltner will be in conversation with John Levine, who received his BA from Oberlin College and an MFA in creative writing from San Francisco State University. He has been teaching at the UC Berkeley College Writing Program as long as this program, Berkeley Writers at Work, began, 1997, and he's a committed teacher consultant to the Bay Area Writing Project since 2000. He's a playwright, he writes academic articles, and his most recent work is in a book called When Challenge Brings Change, How Teacher Breakthroughs Transform the Classroom. So thank you everyone for being here today in the most beautiful room on campus, and enjoy the conversation.
It's such an honor to be see my name on a poster with the title Berkeley Writer. I remember coming to Berkeley when I was like 16 or 17, and that would have been 1977, 78, and my family was showing me the campus, and rubber bullets were flying and protests were happening, and I was like, my dad's like, every good thing begins in Berkeley. And I decided to go to Santa Barbara the last night because I was like, it's kind of a hard time. Do I want to go to the intense place, Berkeley, or the beach? Went to the beach. So it's a real honor. Thank you, John, for inviting me. Do I have any undergrads here who are part of this? Anybody not have a copy of the book? All right, I got some gifts for you. It's so important to read. Here we go. I'm going to distribute them and incur the wrath of young people. So we're going to go over here. And then I will get started with my reading. Notice the British version, a little bit cheekier. They got the wow on the cover page. So there we go. All right. So what John suggested is that I do a bit of reading. And what an honor to be in this room, to see the statue of Mark Twain, one of the great American spirits, here at this great university. So wonderful to be here standing at a podium that had Michael Pollan and Robert Reich and probably Bob Hass and Maxine Hon Kingston, hopefully, and others. So what an honor to be part of this community. So I've chosen 3 passages from Awe, and I want to just give you a little bit of context to this that I think John and I will pick up on. I am a lab scientist, largely. Study in the Darwinian tradition, the human emotions. Happy to talk about Darwin, an awe-inspiring figure and humanist in the Q&A. And had written a couple of books, and then I started to sort of approach the topic of awe, and was really interested in my usual stories, which are kind of neuroscience and evolution. How interesting that evolution built into us this capacity to wonder and explore our imaginations in the face of mysteries. Awe is an emotion we feel when we encounter vast mysteries, and then we wonder about them, and we seek to create. And I was also interested in, I really encountered early on in thinking about awe. I actually think, and I was talking to a student in office hours this morning, William James, who's one of my heroes, the great American philosopher, he was interested in mysticism and religious sentiment, and in the turn of the century in the 1900s. And he just felt like logical philosophy and data just couldn't get to the heart of the experience. And awe is an emotion. It has a layer of experience to it. And this is the first time in my scientific career where I really felt like data and measurement couldn't get the phenomenon of awe. Awe is ineffable, it's mysterious, it transcends words very often. Words are very unreliable, as the Irish philosopher Edmund Burke said, in capturing awe. And so what I ended up doing, which was interesting, guided by Michael Pollan in some sense, who's a really close friend and a mentor, I went out and found awe spots and found awe pioneers, people who I just felt like had awe in them. And I interviewed them. And I'm a social scientist, and I love statistics. And that was a very interesting writer's experience to, whoa, I'm taking notes, and I think I misquoted, and whatever it may be. And then as I was writing, and now I'll read, my younger brother, Rolf, got colon cancer. He was a Berkeley grad, studied literature, graduated with honors. And colon cancer is combat. It's a horror show, as a lot of cancers are. I was fully into it, seeing him every week, watching his body decline. And then he passed away. And I write about that. I start the book with that. And as this was all happening, I was like, I'm a social scientist. I love neurons and statistics. I'm interviewing these people who I feel really tell us something important about awe. And now I'm having this personal experience of grief, and first watching his life transcend which was a transcendent experience, and I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A or conversation with John. But then I was just filled with grief, and Joan Didion, who I think is the greatest nonfiction writer of the 20th century, that's what I would say, and she's a Berkeley grad, awarded the National Medal of Honor by Obama, I think, deservedly so. She wrote a couple of books about grief, which I'd highly recommend. The Year of Magical Thinking, the first, where she talked about grief being a psychosis. And it is. For many people, it is just a rearrangement. And that's how it was for me. And so I had to write. I had to tell that story. As Joan Didion says, we tell stories in order to live. And that's how I felt. So what I'd like to do is read 3 different passages. I'm hoping there's a little light here on the stage. Let's see. Nope? Okay. Thanks to the 19th century Morrison room and those dim lights right there, but it has good ambiance. So ambiance. All right. So let me read, and I'll keep track of time here. I think for 15 minutes or so, 3 different experiences. I think I'll be okay. I'll pull it. Thank you, though. Okay. So what started to happen to me as a writer, is I knew kind of the scientific story. And then I was meeting these people. I just went all kinds of places, talked to ministers, and including Malcolm Clemens Young, who's at Grace Cathedral, who's a Berkeley grad, and prisoners and environmentalists and activists, and went hiking in different mountains and the like to find my way. And I got really interested, and it just started happening experientially. Is like, how can I write in a way that integrates like the experience, the person, layers of science within it, and move the narrative forward. And so the first passage that I'd like to read is, I got pulled in to do restorative justice movement in San Quentin. I had been teaching restorative justice at Berkeley for a long time. I think it's one of the great ideas in human evolution. It has deep origins to chimpanzee behavior, thanks to Frans de Waal's great research. May he rest in peace, just passed away. In indigenous societies, there are a lot of circle processes. So I got pulled into restorative justice and spent days inside San Quentin, which I think every American citizen should do, just to see what our forms of incarceration are, 2 million people in prison. And just started to be awestruck, like most people are, by the men in blue who are inside. And one was Lewis Scott, who is in for life. He's at Folsom now. I go visit him. He's an incredible human being. And just because of the color of his skin and so forth, landed there. And what happened, which was remarkable, and thank you for mentioning the case against solitary confinement, is I was volunteering in San Quentin, meeting these remarkable people, participating in restorative justice, which I taught. And then Lewis introduces me to a man in blue who was part of the hunger strike that led to the case that I was involved in. And I was awestruck, right? And we have this moment where I tried to start to weave together the science and the experience and the character of Lewis. At break that day, Lewis introduced me to a prisoner who had done time in solitary, who stood off in a bleak angle, avoiding direct eye contact. People who have done solitary can be overwhelmed by others' faces, in particular others' eyes. This prisoner, Lewis explained, had been part of a hunger strike protesting solitary confinement. He had pressed small notes into the handle of the broom he used to clean parts of the prison. Those notes would make their way into the hands of other prisoners, who in turn passed them on to other prisoners. It was a vast, interconnected web of resistance. Lewis explained to the prisoner that I had written an amicus brief in the case Ashker versus Governor of California, which is inspired by the moral beauty of the hunger strike that took place at California's Pelican Bay State Prison. Moral beauty is the first source of awe. It is when we're moved by other people's courage and kindness and sense of justice. The Ashker in this case is white supremacist Todd Ashker, who had lived 28 years in solitary at the Pelican Bay Maximum Security Prison in Northern California. In solitary, Ashker spent 23 hours a day by himself in a windowless cell about the size of a parking lot. He could see no other prisoners, nor could he hear them after correctional officers covered the front of his cell with plexiglass. Guards messed with his mail from his family. He was not allowed to hug visitors. In my brief, I argued that depriving prisoners of touch, I do a lot of research on touch, our most powerful language of reverence, harms them physically and mentally and worsens their chances for reform. In one study of prisoners in solitary, 70% showed signs of impending nervous breakdown, 40% suffered from hallucinations, and 27% had suicidal ideation. Solitary confinement is the annihilation of everyday moral beauty. One inmate summed it up aptly: I would rather have gotten the death penalty. In his cell, Ashker began to call out to leaders of Mexican, American, and black gangs in cells nearby and listen through a vent. Their conversations turned to stories of moral beauty, talk about parents and grandparents, fathers and uncles, sisters and brothers and children, and how hard solitary was. Ashker and his neighbors called for a truce among the rival gangs. On July 8, 2013, Ashker led that hunger strike, which involved more than 29,000 prisoners. Protesting that solitary confinement is a violation of the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits the use of cruel and unusual punishment. It was the largest hunger protest in U.S. history. Now that is vast, and vastness is core to awe. In 2015, the case was settled in favor of the prisoners, and more than 2,000 prisoners statewide were moved out of solitary. When Lewis introduced me to the SQ prisoner, we made glancing eye contact, a 250 millisecond act of recognition. I felt a rush of goosebumps at being part of something much bigger than any study I would ever do or talk I might give. At the end of the day, the men in blue stood. We used to, in the restorative justice work, there'd be 180 prisoners in this chapel, and then there'd just be a few of us volunteers. At the end of the day, the men in blue stood to recite the principles of restorative justice. After the shuffle and groaning of 200 people rising to their feet, a silence fell over us in that powerful, quiet moment of shared attention. And then we all recited together, I believe that violence, and then we go on to recite the principles of restorative justice. I won't read them here. At the last word, forgiveness, men turned to one another to shake hands, clasp arms, chuckle softly, and make eye contact in the aftermath, and this is Toni Morrison's language, of allowing goodness its own speech. The room seemed illuminated. Standing at the back of the chapel, Lewis and I broke a rule. We embraced. We did so at that slightly oblique angle which men are wont to hug, one leaning a shoulder into the chest of the other. That kind of embrace was the last act of reverence between Rolf and me. A couple of weeks before his death, he had been reclining on his couch in the living room, drifting in and out in a deep sleep. The opiates rendered it oceanic and dreamlike. He rose to a sitting position on the couch and called me, my wife Molly, and our daughters Natalie and Serafina to come over to him. We pulled in chairs, sitting in a semicircle around him. He gave each of us gifts, telling stories, so often humorous and quirky, about the place of our moral beauty in his life. Labored, deliberate, Rolf stood up, body angled by pain. He shuffled to his kitchen. I followed, my body's motion synced up with his since our first years of life. And there we embraced for only 2 seconds, but it felt longer. As we released, he looked to the ground and said, "We made our way." Other than the words, I can't remember what we all said that last day in conversation. There was no summing up of a life or speech making. What I remember, and this is the science, is feeling his chest and shoulder leaning into mine, the top of his head touching mine near my temple, his large hands on my shoulder blades, and the feeling of awe that ensued. I feel this tactile impression of Rolf today when I embrace people like Louis. It brings to mind Rolf's face and eyes. I can hear his laugh. It sends me down webs of memories of his courage, kindness, strength, and overcoming, which are the real elements of moral beauty. My default self rightly observes that I will never feel that embrace again or be inspired by new acts of his moral beauty. But my body tells me, in the sense of being touched, that he is still somewhere nearby, trying to weave together the science and experience. What then I'd like to read to you is a passage about music. And this was really interesting for me. So let me see where I'm going to start with for you guys. Awe comes out of 8 wonders of life, and we should be teaching a lot of awe at UC Berkeley, moral beauty, nature, spirituality, collective movement, visual design, like in this room, big ideas, life and death, the life cycle, and music. And, you know, of all the things that we really can't get to scientifically, I just feel music, in some sense, is the biggest mystery of awe. It's just transcendent to think that, you know, these sound waves come in after musical instruments are struck or vocal cords produce perturbations of air particles, and then they hit your tympanic membrane, vibrates, sends these neurochemical signals into your brain and your body, and then you're weeping and crying and hugging people and giving away your money and proposing camping trips, and, you know, it's unbelievable. It truly, the semantics of music, like many realms of awe, is probably unachievable in some sense, in the ultimate sense of science. So I started having these musical experiences. I wasn't very musical as a kid, so this was kind of foreign territory for me, but I had done research on music and acoustic features and knew the analysis of it. And a friend of mine, Yumi Kendall, is an awe freak. She emails me all the time about awe, and she plays cello for the Philadelphia Symphony. And I loved her, and it was so powerful to interview people because she said that music is a cashmere blanket of sound. And I just like, you know, there were times when I was interviewing people, no statistic could ever yield that, right? It's like, that's what it is. So I go hear Yumi play. Very interestingly, John Adams, who's a Berkeley composer, and it was so fascinating to discover Berkeley is where minimalism starts in music. And Lamonte Young in the 50s or 60s at our music program starts thinking about minimal music, which it's my go-to for music. You know, Philip Glass and John Adams, Steve Reich, Brian Eno, Japanese minimalists, et cetera. So I was like, wow, that's cool. I'm going to see this friend. John Adams is playing. He's playing this new opera, I guess, Scheherazade 2.0, which is about the great storyteller of the Arabian stories. And I just want to read a short passage because I was like, man, there's how do we ever describe the transcendent cashmere blanket of sound of music? And here is what I wrote. As the symphony, I feel agitated and on edge, made uneasy by the violence of power. Images move through my mind. An unexpected trip to the ER in the Sierra foothills. Rolf's cancer had put him into a near coma. He was rushed to a small hospital where he recovered, regaining blurry consciousness. During my stay, we walked the fluorescent lit halls. In some sense, the Scheherazade in the opera is about subjugation of women and the power of their voice. During my stay, we walked the fluorescent-lit halls, passing two parents whose son was reeling from a psychotic break. Rolf, weighing 148 pounds, walking with blue gown on, stooped, slowly moving in a sterile beige hall, uncertain footsteps, scuffing thin white hospital-issued slippers. Light-hearted comments. I guess I'm not what I used to be, am I? I almost left this time. As the symphony arrives at its end, Scheherazade flees and finds sanctuary. Josephowitz's, she was the violinist who this was written for, her playing is soft. It soars in places and then ends in gentle, elongating notes of serenity. The struggle of a single, outspoken, brilliant woman speaking truth to power with a gift for stories of awe, the Arabian Nights, is over. At the end of struggle and subjugation is peace, felt in Adam's composition in slowing, appreciative sounds whose notes drift off into space. Out of the quiet of the performance's end, the crowd roars. I sense tears and a fast rush of goosebumps, which is the neurophysiology of awe. After the show, I give Yumi a big hug in the lobby and head into a torrential downpour. Headlights stuck in traffic project beams of light that illuminate millions of drops of rain, all making their way from the sky to the ground and then vanishing in ricochets off the asphalt, dissipating in radiating rings of water molecules. People run to Ubers and cabs with programs and coats draped over their heads, clad in slacks and dresses and high heels. They shout familiar sounds, which is also part of the science. Ah, wow, whoa, woohoo, and laugh as they drive away. I don't know a soul around me. I go the wrong way trying to locate my hotel. I get drenched, embraced in torrents of rain, creating such luminous light filled with the droplets on the streets. But I feel located in the world, surrounded by the blanket of the evening sound and the movements and shared rhythm of the people around me. And that just is kind of giving a different sort of representation of what awe does. It is locating you. It is syncing up your movements with other people. The sounds are there, the feeling of awe as a transcendent state. So as I make my way through the 8 wonders, and this will be the last passage that I read, it was a really interesting challenge, and you know, I have a obsessive mind, runs in the family, and it's hard for me to not know the thesis or the measure or the math of things, and writers wiser than me, like Michael Pollan, who I talk to a lot about writing, is like, don't worry, you know, you'll find the idea of it, and you know, you'll find the idea of the book. And I was doing all this exploration of awe, and you know, being with prisoners and moral beauty, and hiking up into the Alps for nature, and following that great transformation in our relationship, Western European relationship to nature in the 1750s, and going to ecstatic dance performances and sporting events. I got to interview Steve Kerr, which was really fun. And talking to ministers, which I got no religion as a kid, and that was edifying. And going to museums, which was very habitual for me. My dad is an artist. And I was like trying to figure out, you know, what unites all these experiences. And I came to the idea, and I think it's largely right, that awe, one of the great achievements in the human mind is systems thinking. And just the way we can not only look at analytically at objects and identify their features, but we can look at entire systems and locate things within systems. It's a whole different causal framework and understanding. That's what Darwin did. The great discoveries of ecosystems, von Humboldt, you know, on down the line. And I started to feel that music is a system. And when I had that experience, I was like, we're all part of this cashmere blanket of sound, and nature's obvious, you know. It's part of our relationship to the environmental world, and visual stuff is locating us in space. Moral beauty, when you're moved, when I was moved by the injustices of our carceral system, I started to realize, like, this is something my mom did. She taught in prisons. My dad, it's just part of our life, you know, and that's my family system of morality. So I was like, whoa, awe does this amazing work of locating us in systems. And I think that's an existential fact that we lose sight of in our very individualistic, separatist, atomistic world. So this is my last summing up. It's only a page long, John. And so, and it kind of just tells the story of what I came to learn in writing this book. Paul Ekman was my mentor. How many of you have heard of Paul Ekman? He's kind of a Bay Area figure. His wife, Marianne Mason, taught at Berkeley. He taught me how to study the face, got me interested. He's a revolutionary in the field of emotion science. And it was funny, when I started my career, when I was 27 years old, as a postdoc in his lab, I interviewed with him in his house in San Francisco in the hills. We went out on his deck, and I was like, what should a young scientist study? And he looked out and he's like, awe. You know, it took me a long time, but finally got to it. So since that day on Paul Ekman's deck, when he pointed me in the direction of awe, I have charted the systems of awe to tell its scientific story. Awe begins with our miraculous eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin responding to the images, sounds, scents, tastes, and touches of the 8 wonders of life. Our sensory systems represent these encounters and neurochemical patterns that make their way to the prefrontal cortex, right here, where we interpret the wonders of life with the symbolic systems that are language and culture. Being moved by awe triggers the release of oxytocin and dopamine, a calming of stress-related physiology, and vagus nerve response, systems of millions of cells working to enable us to connect, be open, and explore. The complex systems of muscles in the face, body, and vocal apparatus. The vocal apparatus is one of the most complicated communication systems in the evolution of life, if not the most. It's incredible. Enable us to convey to others what you find wonderful. Tears and chills themselves end results of systems behind our eyes and under our skin signal to our conscious minds the presence of vast forces that require we merge with others to adapt and understand. Being cultural animals, we turn to ever-evolving cultural systems of chanting, song, and music, painting, carving, sculpture, and design, poetry, fiction, and drama, and supernatural explanation and spiritual practice, our archives of awe, to bring others into a shared understanding of the wonders of life. But what is the end of awe, its unifying purpose? Here's my answer. Awe integrates us into the systems of life, communities, collectives, the natural environment, and forms of culture such as music, art, religion, and our mind's efforts to make sense of all its webs of ideas. The epiphany of awe, I have a chapter on epiphany, is that its experience connects our individual selves with the vast forces of life. In awe, we understand we are part of many things that are much larger than the self. One of my favorite quotes is Jane Goodall, who observes awe in chimpanzees and says, isn't it fitting that chimpanzees would also feel awe and wonder that we feel, which is really the beginnings of spirituality, or being amazed at things outside of the self. Being part of the scientific story of awe has taught me that the evolution of our species, built into our brains and bodies, and emotion, our species-defining passion that enables us to wonder together about the great questions of living. What is life? Why am I alive? Why do we all die? What is the purpose of it all? How might we find awe when someone we love leaves us? Our experiences of awe hint at faint answers to these perennial questions and move us to wander toward the mysteries and wonders of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dacher. Thank you for reading and sharing your thoughts about awe. And I want to thank the Morrison Library, the beautiful Morrison Library, for hosting this event. And I want to thank everyone for coming out on this beautiful day, spending your lunchtime with us. So Dacher, I don't know if you remember this, but the first time I contacted you was I saw you in this very room with your colleague, Yuria Solidwin,
Yeah.
doing a talk, and you were talking about, I guess the book had just come out, and at that, I was so inspired that I decided I was going to design a course on your book,
Oh.
but also on happiness,
Yeah.
and you know, to kind of combat this free-floating anxiety
Yeah.
that we're all feeling, but especially our students.
Yeah, yeah.
And then once I read the book, I realized students have a lot to learn, not just about awe, but about writing.
Yeah.
So I want to
Thank you.
ask you, tell us a little bit about writing in your life. Have you always written? Has
Yeah.
it been? And I also want to mention that when you graciously responded to my email, you said, I would love to do that. I would love to have you teach this course, and I would love to do Berkeley Writers at Work. My mom was a college writing instructor.
Yeah.
My wife teaches awe-based writing,
Yeah.
which explains your, if I may, gift for writing. So
Yeah.
tell us about
Yeah.
your writing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my mom taught writing and published a novel. Her only effort at a book, so that's high praise. My brother was a very good writer. Yeah, you know, I wanted to be a fiction writer, but every effort I made at the imagination, I didn't do that well. I wasn't a good artist or good musician, and fiction, it was hard for me, and I really, you know, the novels of the world have changed my life more than almost any written words. But yeah, I always wrote. You know, I had journals as a kid. You know, usually I was writing about baseball statistics, you know, and counting things and enumerating. And then in grad school, as I headed into this quantitative field, I started to write little essays and was, you know, influenced by essayists, Umberto Eco and Roland Barthes and others, and had a real aspiration for writing. And then what really, I write every day. You know, I'm always writing nonfiction, probably an hour and a half a day alongside academic publishing. And I think Joan Didion got it right, which is we tell stories in order to live. And for me, you know, especially through awe, and now this next book I'm working on, writing is meaning. It's consciousness. It's chapters of life, and it's the activity of the mind. And for me, it's this integration now of data and story out in the world, people I meet, observations. I've loved, you know, Diane Ackerman, just the way she would weave poetry into observations of the world. Michael Pollan, you know, writing about experiences. And so, yeah, it has increasingly become what my mind most gravitates to.
So you say increasingly, when you began writing, when you wrote some of your earlier books, The Power Paradox, Born to Be Good, do you see an evolution in your writing style? I mean, I've read these 3 books. I know you've written other things. I've noticed a stylistic, you not at the expense of the statistics and numbers, but there's more of a narrative weave.
Yeah, thank you.
So were you conscious of that? And is there a tension? Do you find yourself having to, is that, because I haven't written in this style, is it difficult to hold that storyline, to hold that narrative weave, and yet also present, you know, the hard science?
Yeah, it's funny. I think because I had so much narrative in my family. My mom taught literature. My dad was a visual artist and is a visual artist. I was just like, I'm tired of narrative. Stop it, you know. And so I turned to statistics very early in math, and I think you're right, John. Like, the first book was sort of like, well, how does the New Yorker plus Malcolm Gladwell write? You know, start with an interesting off-topic character, move into the phenomenon, and say something unusual, and people were, you know, whatever that is. And then Power Paradox has a whole interesting story to it. And this one really, it was just like my life required a story. Like, man, you're going through this transformation. It's a classic, you know, loss of loved one, growth, learn from people. It's almost like a hero's journey. I'm not a hero, but it's a journey of sorts. And I wasn't good at narrative, still struggle with it. And just like, always have to like, okay, where what's the dynamic arc here? And it's hard, when I consulted with Inside Out, both films, I just had beer with Pete Dacher last night. We have a new idea about Inside Out 3, I can't tell you. But it's a good one, but or maybe I can. But they would say like, hey, we're gonna do this film about this young girl's mind. We got 5 emotions. How many should we have? And I was like, well, there are 27 emotions, so you should have 27 emotions. They're like, who is this guy? Like, no, we're telling a story. 27 characters never existed in a story. So yeah, it's hard. I'm always like, but that finding, and you got to shave stuff off and honor the narrative. It's a struggle for me.
Let's jump to Inside Out and
Yeah.
Inside Out 2. So you shared a story where you were called by Pete Dacher, and he asked you if you wanted to help out with this movie, Inside Out. And your first inclination or hope, I don't know,
Yeah.
was that he wanted you to voice one of the emotions.
Now, why are you talking about this?
No. Well, I want to know
Yeah.
which emotion you would voice.
Yeah.
And you can include one of the 22
Okay.
that aren't included.
I'll tell you my 2 favorites, but we're going to get, how many of you have my class before? Just a couple. Joya has. Okay, I'm going to count to 3, and I want to hear your best compassion sound. 1, 2, 3.
Ah.
Isn't that beautiful? So that'll be my first.
Okay.
Awe. 1, 2, 3.
Ah.
There we go. So yeah, I honestly thought when Pete called me up in 2010 in Old Tolman Hall, hey, we're doing a film about emotion. You teach it at Berkeley. Come on down. I was like, cool. They want to use my voice for a character, and that wasn't the case because they have people like, Amy Poehler and Bill Hader and the like. So Mindy Kaling, and I thought I really pitched hard and it's such a great question, right? Like, if emotions are characters with structures and stories to them, what do you populate a young girl's mind with? And I pitched awe, right? And they aren't listening to me. So they played around with a character for Inside Out 2 with awe.
Okay.
Who looked like I usually have long hair. The character had long hair and looked like a Berkeley professor. But
Not surprising.
He didn't make the cut.
Not surprising. I want to jump to a couple of your other books as well, and I did give you fair warning that I was going to call you on this.
Yeah.
So I'm not calling you on it, I just want to hear your thoughts. So in The Power Paradox, you write, under the subheading of The Gift of Power, exploitative, selfish, coercive behavior unravels the fabric of strong groups. Groups know this and also have histories with individuals who abuse power and act in greedy and impulsive ways. So groups choose to give power to people who are enthusiastic, kind, focused, calm, and open. So my question is, have you changed your thoughts on that given, let's just say, our divisive times?
Yeah. I wrote that. It was a humbling experience writing. I wrote that. It came out as Trump was rising the first time. Obviously, that's who you're referring to. And Trump, he violates a lot. He's the candidate of moral ugliness. And right now I'm working on moral beauty. And just as potent a force in human history as moral ugliness is, coldness and not caring and derision and dehumanization. Awe is the emotion of humanization. It really brings out our appreciation of humanity. And there are a lot of great emotions that are about dehumanization, disgust and contempt and the like. And so it was humbling to, have this idea about power. And that largely works. There's an academic answer, which is that historically we've seen this great shift in power. If you think about 200 years ago, 400 years ago, it was a much different world in terms of power. So we are moving out of this hyper-patriarchal, racist, colonialist framework slowly. That's really 10,000 years old. But it's slow, and we have seen a reverting to authoritarianism that caught all social scientists off guard, and I was humbled by that. But I think it begs this question that, probably most people, this is the most liberal city in the country in terms of voting patterns. that we're grappling with. Like, how could the guy at Madison Square Garden, like, why do 40%, 45% of people like that, moved by that? And they'd probably say it's awe-inspiring, and it fits certain elements of it, and we have to think about that really hard. Like, what is he saying? What's he doing? Why are middle working class people? It's such a flip of politics. Why is he appealing to working class voters? It's more than just simple racism. There's something else there. So yeah, I was humbled. It was embarrassing, and this is what happens as writers. Like, you put an idea out, you do your best, and then, I got kind of hammered by the Guardian on that one, and it's like, I better hide today, and but I think a record number of people voted in Biden's election, 67% of Americans. The popular vote has always gone against Trump, so maybe there's something there. And then it's the challenge, sense of Kamala, like, yeah, joy's good, not going backwards is good, but is there a morally beautiful argument she can make? We'll see.
And when you put it that way, yeah, it must be awe-inspiring for some people, that power.
Although I still feel that's an empirical question. Like, when I code faces, and when I look at the faces at Trump's rally, it looks more like rage and, madness, if you will. So, but awe, people, I think because they hear Greater Good Science Center, this guy teaches happiness at Berkeley. All right, what about the bad stuff? We're going to get them. And I'm like, I didn't say there's not bad stuff in the world, And awe is put to a lot of bad uses. Nazism, the Rwandan genocide had a lot of awe and music and dance and ritual leading up to the 600,000 people dying through machetes. So it's up to us to do our best with them.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to call you on that.
I like it.
I'm
I think
really
it's important.
grappling with that.
Yeah.
Like, how do we reconcile this?
Yeah. No, John, it's important. I think it's really important to, if writing, social science writing has the allure of data and theory, et cetera, we should hold it accountable. And Malcolm Gladwell now is, oops, that broken windows theory, got that one wrong, but I'll write a bestseller about how I'm wrong. And
might as well.
Yeah, you'd never get tenure, buddy, at Berkeley.
Let's talk a little bit about your writing process. So you write every day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And have you been? Has that held through your academic career?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. I'm kind of taken aback that I get to ask. Yeah. For me, the process is. Joan Didion, we tell stories in order to live. And I think what she was saying is the life of the mind, the generation of energy and growth and reproduction of ideas, all the four properties of life come out of writing for many of us, probably a lot of people in this room. And so I think it may have been reading about some writer, John Updike, like write at the same time every day. So I write early in the morning. I have a big, busy life, so 5:30, 6 to 8. And those are just and it's probably been 10, 12 years of that, and they just are great hours. And then I prepare for that through the day. I walk a lot, and and I start feeling ideas. Oh, I'll put that back in. I just thought I'm very interested. I'm working on moral beauty, and I went and the idea of grace and Nicholas Poussin's paintings of Jesus' 7 sacraments. And I suddenly was like, I saw them, and I was like, wow, these are amazing on moral beauty. And now I'll put it back in the introduction. So right in the morning, reading, moving, jotting notes, always taking notes. I probably, each book has a couple notebooks of just diagrams and organization frames and words, and then I read a lot. I read books or writers who inspire. Sarah Bakewell's has a new book out on humanism. You should all read. Amazing, right? So it gives me stuff, and then it all happens in the morning.
Do you write on a word processor? Do you ever write in longhand? Do you carry a notebook? No.
I carry notebooks, yeah, definitely.
You carry notebooks?
Lots of them,
So you're walking around. Tell us what it looks like. What's your day look like? How does so
Yeah.
you write in the morning,
Yeah.
and then you get an idea at 3 p.m.
Yeah.
And you have 15 minutes between interviews or meetings or
Yeah.
classes. What happens?
I'm writing all the time. And if you guys are writers, write all the time. You know, waiting for the colonoscopy. You know, dentist appointment. You know, little 10-minute bursts. Really, you can do a lot because the mind is always working on it. And I do have notebooks. I don't know if I have one around, but I'm always diagramming and drawing and, you know, tables of ideas, moving them around. And then I allow for this kind of writing I'm trying to work on of like experiential science narrative of people, observing, you know, interviewing, and just constantly generating content that then gets into the document. And I minimally outline. I used to outline more, and now it's like 5, 6 ideas, structure, and then go, because I know I'm going to rewrite a lot and move stuff around.
I'd like to hear about that, your rewriting process, because that's a lot of what we writing instructors
Yeah.
preach to our students.
Yeah.
That, you know, writing is rewriting. And I'll admit, when I was an undergrad, I wrote my papers at 2 in the morning and didn't rewrite them. But tell us a little bit about your rewriting process.
Yeah, it's hard, and you know, and you youngsters out there, you know, the first things you write, you're like, oh, I'm so attached to that word and that phrase, and it makes me think of my mom, you know, and whatever it is, and oh, that was so clever of me, and you just gotta like become. I don't want to say a terrorist, but you just got to get violent with your writing, and just so when I rewrite now, it's a whole other mental state, and I encourage my students to like, writing is about mental states, and you'll have periods where you're really generative, you'll have periods where you're really hypercritical, and I find that in rewriting, you know, and just like it usually. I tend to write a lot of excessive sentences, redundancy, throat-clearing passages, like, all right, let's see this chapter, and you start writing, you know, and chop all that stuff out. And then you have bad habits, you know. For me, words come in 3s. I'm always listing 3 things, so I got to expand to 4, down to 2, that's hard. And rewriting has become really fun, you know. And now I know when I first start writing stuff, it's the first thing, and that frees you up, and you can make mistakes and be loose. And then I know the real work, and there's a lot of reorganization. Books will. I can't remember how this has 11 chapters maybe. They may start out with 16 chapters, go down to 7. And get back up to 11. I'm always thinking about, you know, like right now, I've got this chapter on moral beauty, and I got a whole section on the nervous system, and I'm like, that should probably be its own chapter. So I'm always deliberating too.
So there's a cutting room floor, so to speak, of chapters that didn't make it into.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Tons.
Yeah.
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 Pixar draws 75,000 scenes to make a movie. And probably several 100,000 that get winnowed down to their films, thousands of pages. And yeah, probably I'd double the amount of output and then get down to what is in the book.
Do you find your knowledge of psychology and consciousness, or maybe your consciousness, helps you in understanding your process, your thought process in writing? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, I am. It's funny. I am surprisingly uninsightful about my consciousness, and I have to. I think this is what, you know, I'm what you would probably call a discovery-oriented scientist, like Charles Darwin. Go out and observe a lot of stuff, and then, oh, it took him 30 years to figure out natural selection. Now we talk about data-driven science, which is go out and measure phenomena, and then you end up figuring out its core theoretical structure. And that's how I write. So regrettably, it's hard for me to like what I realized in Awe is every I the core scientific effort was to figure out how do we characterize scientifically this experience that William James called ineffable, and it is. That was my scientific work, and I realized like the key thing alongside this narrative of how I came to understand life after my brother's death, what the key device was each chapter would recapitulate this structure of the experience of awe, that it's vast, that it is mysterious, and I have to write about mystery, and that it moves you, and you feel small and quiet, right? And want to do things in the world. And late in the book, I was like, oh, that's the key thing, is I have these experiences, the people I talk to have these experiences, and ideally the reader will too, right? As the reader reads Yumi Kendall, when she lands on the idea that music is a cashmere blanket of sound, people will be like, and they'll feel that when they hear the prisoners' voices. I quote the prisoners. I was giving a talk in San Quentin. I was like, you guys tell me what awe is. It was just this moment of experiment, and their answers were the best things in the book. My daughter, reading the Quran, my daughter, the light on the bay, my cellies, music or whatever. So that took a long time to get to for me. I'm not good at motif and narrative, because that's all my mom was about, and I'm like, I can't be like her. So, and so it's hard for me.
Do you have a designated place where you write?
I do, yeah. Well, I write at this one spot in my house. I write on campus. You guys should all be. I write outdoors. I love being outdoors. I write everywhere. I write maniacally on planes. So it's, and then I'm writing everywhere. We tell stories in order to live.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if you're writing everywhere, you can write anywhere. You don't need to have.
No, I think
some writers are very meticulous about them, very precious about what they have to have, and they can't do it if they don't have it. Or maybe that's an excuse.
I love the word precious in that sentence.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. When I hear people tell me like, I have to have no sound and perfect light and the aroma of rosemary coming in, and you can't talk in this space because I'm writing. I'm like, come on, let's write.
Do you need to have coffee, tea, water?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. There we go. All right, we're getting somewhere here. Okay,
yeah.
So what do you need to write? What?
I like to write. My writing follows the waves of caffeine in my body. So it's like early morning, start revving up and my daughters have teased me about this. They're like, you can't email me in the morning. And I'm like, what do you mean? I've got all these great ideas, And so it's just like caffeine surges, and then, but I find, and this is so important for young writers, like writing needs different tasks, as John is suggesting. You got to be critical, you got to be generative, you got to be associative, you got to find the motifs. And different states of consciousness during the day are good for different kinds of writing. And so, the generative stuff's in the morning. I often like to write when I'm hungry. I don't know if this is a publishable tip, but because, I won't eat and just like I feel hungry and I want to generate. So coffee, tea, Michael Pollan writes really nicely about how the Age of Enlightenment, all the math that came out of that era, came out of caffeine in cafes, and UC Berkeley and Berkeley are a testimony to the power of caffeine. And then I like very often I'll find myself in calmer, slower states. I've done yoga, I feel relaxed, not so critical, and that's a good time to look at your writing, right? And you feel like, this is way overblown, or this is too much, So it's good to approach your writing in different states.
Some writers would use the hunger as an excuse to go to the refrigerator.
Yeah.
Good for you for resisting that. Let's talk a little bit about your teaching, and you teach a course on happiness. Is there writing involved? Do your students write in that class?
No, there are 500 students in that class, and so it's against the law for me to have my GSI's grade 2,500 essays or whatever it would be. So yeah, they don't write, and that makes me really sad. And I'd love to. It makes me sad. They get a lot of humanities, which I'm very proud of.
Yeah.
Which I think are essential.
So when you've written something, it's time to revise. Who do you share your writing with? Who do you have trusted readers that read your work?
It really, actually, this is the first time I really had readers read it. Those two books would have been better had I had readers help me out. And I had different kinds of people. My older daughter, who's very critical, I gave chapters to, Michael Pollan. I thought about audiences who might be interested in this and had them read it. So Barry Boyce, who ran the Mindful magazine. I gave Urias Levine a copy, who's indigenous, person of color, colonized by history. Like, what would somebody who's been colonized look at? Where would they sense the privilege in this? I gave chapters to who else? That's about it. Usually, I don't do as much as that as I should, and have made mistakes because of it.
And do you give them specific tasks to look for because you
Yeah.
know what their strengths are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 Because we'll often encourage our students to come up with questions, not just say, here, what do you think? Because that's a big ask, and you're probably going to get, oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really give you something to work with. So you
Yeah.
ask them, you give them focused things to look at.
Very much so. Michael Pollan is a genius at teaching writing, and it's like, just give me the formal properties of this. Like I said, I think in this age, we got to watch out for privilege and bias, and so Urias Levine was great on like, man, that feels like colonization, and that feels true. So it was task specific. My older daughter she doesn't understand anything that I do, so she was a great critic, this feels implausible or whatever. So.
And then what do you do with that feedback? How does that feed into your rewriting, your revision? Do you take their notes? I mean, I'm curious.
I take it really seriously. People don't realize, this is a funny story. Michael Lewis, when he was writing about Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman in the Undoing Project, Danny Kahneman was a Berkeley psychology professor, won the Nobel Prize. His best friend in life, Amos Tversky, I TA'd for at Stanford. They did this amazing social science. And Michael Lewis was writing about Amos. He had passed away, and he got to go through his files. And he came to me and he said, it's amazing. I've got this big, thick folder of all these critiques of Amos's research. And I was like, Michael, that's peer review. He was like blown away. He's, you guys face this all that? I was like, yeah, So I was thinking about it, probably, probably 2,000 single-space pages of very harsh critique of my writing in science. And so I'm really good at okay, I'll change, And so when people critique my writing, I take it really seriously and very rarely push back. Usually they're right, and it's been very helpful.
Yeah, a lot of our R4B students and our R1B students are just embarking on the research process and learning about scholarly sources and peer review and how important it is.
Man, peer review, it's like the jury. It's unbelievable, and it's important for nonfiction writers. Blogs, websites, a lot of stuff now is not peer review. It's not a community of scholars critiquing it anonymously. I go through all of that for my papers, and it's sacred. I really worry about nonfiction writing right now because of the degradation of peer review, which is too bad.
Mm-hmm. A couple more questions, then I want to open it up to the audience. You wear many hats. One of them is as a podcaster, as the host of the Science of Happiness podcast.
Yeah.
How did that start? What's your experience? Tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
Thank you. That's really nice of you. Anybody listening to The Science of Happiness here? That's good, because it's a great show. We have about a couple 100,000 listeners. It supports 3 or 4 positions through our journalism school. I'm very proud of that. We've been able to, regrettably, a lot of stuff we do tends to gravitate to people of privilege. And our podcast, we've had a lot of prisoners on the show. Some of the men in blue I met, 3 of them in San Quentin, get their word out. So it's been really fun. And it's the same exercise that I'm engaging in, which is science plus personal story plus cultural narrative, weaving together, but in this case, conversations, and to have the story offer lessons of life, And so one of my favorites is Darnell Washington, who I knew in San Quentin. I still am dear friends with him. He's now kind of rehabilitating this park in LA where he grew up as a kid and then was overrun by the Bloods, a gang in LA that he became part of, that really changed once cocaine moved into the drug market. The Bloods were a much different entity, a lot of pro-social stuff. We had Darnell on, and he's one of the most remarkable people, integrates Buddhism and his life and, meditation and spirituality. And so it's funny, at a place like Berkeley, this is an intense university, and I'm always worried about getting research articles out, and I get no publications from podcasts, but it's some of the most meaningful conscious time of the week, because it's really stories. And then the beauty of a podcast, and I think we're using it wisely, is you can get to, academics turns out to be really conventional. And we're actually very conservative intellectually in many ways. Like my field is like, okay, let's do something that'll work and that's tried and true, and that people, gratitude, 3 good things, And, and I'll give you my opinion there. God knows.
I'm getting my list of niece friends names mixed up.
What the hell is that? Salad niçoise? Okay. But the podcast is this opportunity, because it's a different form, to there's one weird study on listening to birdsong and it makes you happy, and so we get more experimental, which has been really fun. So it's been a good exercise.
And it's great for me. I listen to them, and I get tips on breathing. I just listened to one on breathing and evoking sound as you breathe.
The humming breathe.
Yeah, the humming. Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So if you have 15 minutes, just check it out. It will improve your life, I guarantee.
Thank you.
So I'd like to open this up to the audience for any questions that you might have. If you just raise your hand.
Come on. There we go.
I'm just curious, a lot in your notebooks you talk about,
Yeah.
that you do a lot of drawing and
Yeah.
shading, and I wonder if you would mention or talk about the difference between kind of the verbal process
Nice.
versus the visualization.
And we might need to repeat that question just so the audience can hear. No, you're not mic'd.
Yeah, so the question was what about drawings when you write? And I'm a huge fan of Kandinsky. His forms that are ideas, but they're drawings. And I remember seeing this art exhibit in Paris on doodles, the doodles of great artists. And they're better than the art in many ways, just this random stuff. And for me, my drawing, because in social science we think of flow charts, it's just concepts, flowing them around. Tables, I'm drawing a lot of tables and moving stuff around in tables, drawing. There's a little bit of doodling there pretty regularly. I play with words, just write out a bunch of words when I think about the books. What I've learned at this 3rd book is echoing and repetition, which is a principle of awe of Edmund Burke. So it's write a word and just sort of look at it, draw around it. So yeah, it's really, I think it's the narrative that emerges, and then the rest of the words are meat on those bones. And if I was a better drawer, I would have better drawings that were guiding me. I've always been guided by visual images. So.
Yes.
You mentioned a few times that you write to tell stories and you use stories to live.
Yeah.
I wonder if that is why you write, and if so, whether you also write to find out what you think.
Yeah. Yeah, so do I write in order to live, and then do I write in order to know what I think? And I would say there's a whole new science of narrative and meaning making and expressive writing. Some of the young people may journal, right? It's just building on these traditions. And I do write to live, to understand my consciousness. For properties of my mind, it just is what I do and have done, I now realize, pretty intensely for a long time, probably since I was 18. And then I would say I kind of know I know the broad claims that I want to make in a book. And I kind of know, like Michael Pollan taught me, like when you write a book, like imagine you're going to be on Terry. I've never been on Terry Gross. I'll never make it because I'm not an actor or a rock and roll star. But she's going to say like, well, what's this book about? And you're like, Bob. And I kind of know those things. But I really write to get the motifs and the currents and the kind of the tone of that I don't know, you know. So I'm working on a book on moral beauty right now, and I kind of know the kind of reader's experience that'll occur through it, but I don't. And I'm going to write it all. I'll have 250, 300 pages, and then figure it out in the rewrite. So I write to live, yes, and then I kind of know what I'm going to think, and then the beauty of it comes in writing, if there is beauty. Yes?
You spoke on your journaling.
Yeah?
And I'm curious on that, what it's like and how is it distinct from your other types of writing?
Yeah. Yeah, I had a period, it was really important, and it was about at your age, where, and I'd really, man, we haven't talked about reading, and you guys should, that's why I gave away some books. You know, when you write, especially young, like, who do you love? And Robert Sapolsky, I was like, man, he's great. Steven Pinker, Joan Didion, you know, I just like had Joan Didion around me during this book all the time. Rebecca Solnit, you know, who gets lost, she gets a little crazy, but when she's brilliant, she's as good as it gets. Michael Pollan on psychedelic experiences. It was really interesting for journaling, and I'd really encourage you guys. Journaling is a great tradition. Spiritual journaling is how we thought of nature journaling. There are a lot of awe-based journaling writing. You probably know a lot about that, John. But when I was your age, and this is just, it's such an important lesson was, I was reading, there are just a lot of cool essayists in the 80s when I was in grad school of, you know, Umberto Eco or, you know, Adam Gopnik or Jim Carroll, the rock and roller, Basketball Diaries, kind of these experiential, first-person observational journals almost. And I was doing a lot of that. You know, I'd go to a nightclub and check it out and go home and try to write out the kind of the impressionistic stuff. And I did a lot of that. And so my journaling wasn't, here's how I'm doing. It was more observational. Like, what am I seeing? What does it mean theoretically? And it turns out it was really important. You know, now, 35 years later, it's like, oh, that's what I'm doing now, you know, but with a little bit more skill.
In the back there, please. Yes, you're in the back, sorry.
Well, first of all, thank you for this last hour. I think it's really amazing. And I'm struck
Thanks.
by the combination of play and joy in your work,
Yeah, thank you.
but also academic rigor.
Yeah, thanks.
And John shared with us a little essay that you wrote about Jen
Yeah.
and about the Jen ratio. And when I read it, I was actually hoping to ask you this question. So, your descriptions of writing, the writing process,
Yeah.
mental states, talking about the emotions associated with those, because I think for many of our beginning students, the writing experience has a negative
Yeah.
Jen ratio.
Yeah.
And what can we do about that in the classroom, or do you, as a teacher, or at the university? At the university, do we tip our experiences, mental experiences, to the negative Jen?
We do. Yeah, thank you for your kind words. And yeah, I think, and I talked to my happiness class about this, like, somehow the university experience has lost its wonder and wandering and, it's so great to see young people here, to really have periods of every day where you're letting your imagination go and you're wondering about things and asking questions and being really happy when you don't know things and mysteries. Charles Darwin always, and a great writer, Darwin, Adam Gopnik has written about that, mysteries. And so, I would defer to people like John, like how do we build that mind back into the education experience. My Berkeley class on happiness, do I have any students from the class here? I know Joya is here. Nice to see you, Joya. Has a lot of this. It's like, there's rigor and there's neurons and there's Walt Whitman and there's absurdity. And I feel like, and it's great that Mark Twain is outside. We need a lot more levity in our intellectual lives, and we need a lot more beauty. I worry that the data sciences will lose that, as I think in some ways they do. So I try to orient learning at Berkeley around questions and mysteries and the experience of joy and awe at discovery in whatever we're talking about, and also absurdity and how preposterous things are. So, and make sure that there are good emotions in every class that we go through together. And how you do that with writing is your question.
Well, I actually have one last question. I always ask my students to help me prepare for these interviews. I believe writing is a collaborative act, as we know. And we've touched on most of the topics, but there's one question we didn't, and I quote, "If you could return to your college years, what would you change during that time to maximize your happiness as a student?"
Well, I was at UC Santa Barbara in the 1980s. It was a very naive and happy time. I think, what would I have done to be happier?
And leading towards how can you advise, with your wisdom or your experience, how can today's students maximize their happiness?
Yeah. That was, I mean, the thing, I did it wrong and I did it right. I really feel young people need periods of wandering and doubt and wondering. And our educational system fast tracks our young people to intensive work right away. And then they get burned out. And that we are seeing in the broad data. And what I did wrong is when I was a student, I paid my way through school and I worked 70 hours a week in the summer. And so it was a particular kind of job where I could make enough money to pay my way through school. And I didn't have that summer of like drifty. But what I did right is I saved money and I traveled. I wandered for 6 months before grad school. And I just think young people, you can save money, you can work, and then go and just take some great books. For me, Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, and books on Buddhism and Taoism, Lao Tzu I always take, and some of the science books at the time, and just wander and let your mind, give yourself 3 months. And I know it's a privilege, but if you can save money, carve that out, it's really, it'll serve you a long time. And so I think had I done a little bit more of that as an undergrad, it would have been good. But it was such a different era. The UC was, you could pay your way through school, and there wasn't the pressure. But try to do it. Try to give yourself a little freedom of thought, and exploration of writing you might want to do, or and read and see where it takes your mind.
And on that note, thank you, Professor Dacher Keltner. Thank you, Morrison Library, and thank you all for coming out today.